Have you ever really stopped to think about the bedrock of American identity?
Mm.
Not, the slogans or the myths, but the deep, often pretty uncomfortable historical forces
Mm.
that have shaped how we even understand something like race,
Yeah.
and how that understanding has had just a profound impact on individual lives, like generation after generation.
That's exactly the kind of heavy question that pulls us into a deep dive, isn't it?
Right.
Today, we're really immersing ourselves in Ta-Nehisi Coates' work, Between the World and Me. It's incredibly powerful.
Exactly. And this isn't some, dry academic thing.
No, not at all.
It's a nonfiction, came out back in 2015, and it's framed as a letter from Coates to his son.
Which makes it so direct, really intimate.
Yeah, and for us, the listeners, it feels like being invited into this really crucial, maybe difficult conversation between a father and his child about, well, the realities of being black in America.
And the title itself, Between the World and Me, it carries history, doesn't it?
It does.
It's from a Richard Wright poem, which kind of hints right away that there's this long legacy of Black thinkers grappling with race and identity in the U.S.
So, okay, what's our mission with this deep dive then? What are we trying to get at?
Well, I think we really want to unpack some of Coates' core arguments,
Wait.
like the concept of race itself, how it even came to be, and the historical construction of whiteness.
Right, that's a big one.
And the vulnerability, the persistent vulnerability of the Black body in America, also the sort of illusion of the American dream for many people.
And crucially, his call to really confront these truths, right, without looking for easy answers or, comfortable stories.
Exactly. No easy outs. We're going to dig into some really compelling stuff.
Like the connection he draws between that idealized dream and the exploitation of Black bodies.
Yeah, how one rests on the other, in his view, and the role of fear, constant fear, in shaping Black experiences.
And his own journey, too, right, towards trying to find truth and understanding through just like relentless reading and thinking.
Definitely. Okay, so where does he start? He kicks off with this really striking anecdote.
Yeah, the news show thing. He's on a broadcast, different locations, and the host asks him this. Well, it seems simple, but it's loaded. What does it mean to lose your body?
And right away, there's this huge gap, isn't there?
Totally.
Coates points out the gap between her world, this presumably comfortable mainstream viewpoint, and the world for which I had been summoned to speak.
A world with very different realities.
Precisely. And that sets the stage perfectly for one of his main arguments, the social construction of race.
He says, and this is pretty blunt, that the belief in white Americans was built on looting and violence.
That's a stark statement. But he insists, this isn't him being extreme.
No, he roots it in history.
Right, in American history. He says, look, when Americans talk about their democracy, they might vaguely know about times they fell short.
Yeah, the heresies, he calls them.
Like torture, theft, enslavement. But he argues these aren't just blips on the radar, they're woven right into the nation's fabric.
He even challenges the whole idea that the main problem is America betraying government to the people.
What's his take there?
He argues it's more about how the people was defined in the first place, the whose was included in that term.
And Black individuals were explicitly excluded for so much of U.S. history.
Exactly. So even in 1863, with the Emancipation Proclamation, the definition of people still didn't really cover his mother, his grandmother.
And by extension, him. So it's not just failing an ideal, it's the foundation the ideal was built on.
Right. Which brings us to maybe the most crucial point he makes about race itself.
Okay.
Race is the child of racism, not the father. Let's unpack that because it flips how a lot of people think.
It really does. He's basically tearing down the idea that race is some, natural biological division based on skin color or hair.
Those differences always existed, he says.
Right, but the belief that those differences are paramount, that they should organize society and signal some deep inherent qualities, that's the new idea, he argues. That's what created the concept of white.
So the idea, the belief in white supremacy, that came first.
That's his argument, yeah. The need for a hierarchy came first.
And then race was constructed to justify it, to maintain that power structure.
Precisely. It wasn't like, oh, we're white, therefore we're superior. It was more like, we need a system of power, let's invent whiteness and enforce it violently to put ourselves on top.
And he really doesn't shy away from the violence involved in this elevation of the belief in being white.
No, not at all. He lists it out. It's brutal.
Yeah.
Through the pillaging of life, liberty, labor, and land, through the flaying of backs, the chaining of limbs, it goes on. Rape, selling children,
All meant, first and foremost, he says, to deny black people the right to govern their own bodies.
It was a physical assault sustained over centuries, not just bad ideas.
Okay, so then he pivots a bit, challenging this idea of American exceptionalism, American innocence,
Yeah, he says you can't claim to be exceptional, like superhuman.
and then plead, oops, mortal error, when confronted with the ugly parts of history.
Exactly. He calls for taking America's own claims of exceptionalism seriously. If you say you're unique, morally superior.
Then you get held to a higher standard when we look at your actions, past and present.
Right. But he also acknowledges how hard that is. There's this powerful apparatus urging us to accept American innocence at face value.
It's just easier, isn't it, to look away?
So much easier. It's comfortable to believe the nation is fundamentally good. Facing the darkness takes real effort.
Then he shifts again, focusing on the visceral reality of racism, moving past abstract terms.
Like race relations. He says that kind of phrase just obscures the physical violence.
This is where he gets really direct.
Yeah, it's a crucial point. He insists, quote, racism is a visceral experience, that it dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscle, extracts organs, cracks bones, breaks teeth.
Wow, it's not just prejudice, it's physical.
Tangible, brutal consequences for the body. And then that line.
The one about the sociology and history.
The sociology, the history, the economics, the graphs, the charts, the regressions all land with great violence upon the body. You must never look away from that.
That just hits you. It forces you to connect the abstract ideas to actual physical suffering.
It really does. And then he tells that story right after trying to explain this.
To the news host again.
Yeah. And she immediately asks about hope.
Right, like she couldn't sit with the reality he just described. She needed that comforting, feel-good ending.
And he feels like he failed in that moment, because it just shows how hard it is to communicate that reality across different experiences.
It really underscores how deep that desire for the comforting dream runs.
Which leads him right into defining his concept of the dream.
Yeah, the perfect houses with nice lawns, the Memorial Day cookouts, the tree houses and the Cub Scouts, that whole suburban ideal.
But he argues it's not just some neutral goal. It rests on our backs, he says, the bedding made from our bodies.
Meaning it's built directly on the exploitation of black people, historically and ongoing.
That's the core insight, isn't it? That the comfort and normalcy many strive for is, in his view, fundamentally linked to that exploitation. Whose dream are we talking about, and who pays the price?
There's a real sadness there, too, not just anger. When he says he feels sorry for the dreamers who don't get it.
Yeah, a kind of melancholy. Because that belief, however comforting for some, kind of perpetuates the whole system and prevents a real reckoning.
He brings it back to the personal then, really powerfully. The moment his son finds out about Michael Brown's killers going free.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking. A child's innocence hitting that wall of injustice.
And Coates' decision. It's scuff. He doesn't offer false comfort.
No, he echoes what his grandparents told him. That this is your country, that this is your world, that this is your body, and you must find some way to live within all of it.
Wow. That just sums up the central question of his life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. How one should live within a black body within a country lodged in the dream.
It's a question that just hangs over the whole book.
And he suggests the pursuit of the question is the answer, in a way, a constant navigation, which leads him to reflect on fear.
Yeah, how fear wasn't new for him as a father. It was always there, underpinning his own childhood.
He talks about the extravagant boys in his neighborhood.
With the big rings and medallions.
Their clothes, their style. He sees it as armor against their world.
Masking that underlying fear.
It's a fascinating reinterpretation, isn't it? Seeing that bravado not just as youth, but as a shield against the ghosts of the battle days, trying to project control.
He saw it everywhere, even in the ritual to a street fight.
Those unwritten rules, highlighting their vulnerability.
And in the music, the grand boast and bluster.
Like every outward thing was a reaction to that fear, trying to assert themselves in a world that devalued them.
He shares those really personal memories, too. His Nana's hard manner.
And his father's anxious use of the belt.
Both coming from this deep fear of losing their kids to the streets, to the dangers all around.
It shows how that societal fear gets inside families, shaping parenting, and that story about his grandmother being beaten for potentially putting herself at risk.
Yeah, that fear passed down through generations.
And he makes that really sharp point, the violence within black communities, even when it came from fear and love.
It mirrored the violence from the outside world.
A tragic cycle. He talks about a society offering safety nets to some, but only the club of criminal justice to others.
leaving black communities exposed in a state of infirmity before the criminal forces of the world.
And this wasn't just theory for him. He felt that vulnerability directly, that incident in 1986.
Right, when the boy pulled a gun on him.
Yeah. The suddenness, the feeling of death just rising up, it really shaped him, solidified that sense of different worlds, different realities.
Fostering that cosmic injustice feeling and the desire to escape.
He uses that powerful metaphor, doesn't he? The streets shackling one leg.
And the schools the other. Let's get into his critique of schools.
He saw street rules as harsh, but at least practical, dealing with immediate danger.
Whereas school rules felt abstract,
Right.
aimed at some vague goal of grow up and be somebody.
Totally disconnected from his reality. All rote discipline, not curiosity.
He mentioned sitting in 7th grade French, having zero connection to France.
Right. It highlights that feeling of being taught stuff that seemed irrelevant to his survival, his life,
He felt schools were hiding truths, not revealing them.
and just presenting themselves as an escape route from death and jail. He cites that awful statistic.
60% of young black male high school dropouts ending up in jail.
Should be a national scandal.
And his parents, they rejected dogma, right?
Mm-hmm.
No religion, no holidays marketed by the people who wanted to be white.
Yeah, so that left him without a belief in a just God. His view of the universe became very physical, chaotic, ending in death.
A view reinforced by that encounter with the gun.
Definitely. But amidst all that, his grandmother was key.
Teaching him to read and write.
Not just skills, but as a means of investigation, especially of himself.
Writing became this tool for ruthless self-interrogation.
Facing his own rationalizations, realizing he wasn't innocent, and neither were others.
He also talks about being uncomfortable as a kid with how the civil rights movement was taught.
Yeah, those images of black people enduring violence, seemingly loving their tormentors.
It didn't sit right with him. He questioned why only black heroes seemed to be nonviolent. How does that compare to, standard ways it's taught?
Well, often it's presented as this clean narrative of moral progress through nonviolence, which is true in part, but it can minimize the sheer brutality faced and also the diversity of black responses besides nonviolence. Coates pushes back against that sanitized version,
He starts seeing the streets and schools as, arms of the same beast?
both using fear and violence just differently. Failure in school often led straight to destruction on the streets.
And he critiques how language like intention or personal responsibility gets used.
Yeah, used for broad exoneration, he says, letting society off the hook for systemic problems, preserving the dream.
It's around this time he really connects with Malcolm X.
What drew him in?
Malcolm's honesty, his refusal to offer comforting myths, his pragmatic, grounded approach.
He saw Malcolm as the first truly honest political figure he'd encountered.
Loved that Malcolm didn't care about making white people comfortable, spoke his truth, even the angry parts.
Seeing that anger as a legitimate response to oppression.
And that line from Malcolm, "If you're black, you were born in jail."
That must have resonated deeply with Coates' own feelings of confinement, of lacking control over his own body.
Yeah, he saw Malcolm's transformation through study in prison as a possible path for himself.
A way to reclaim his body through knowledge, through writing.
And for Coates, his Mecca, his place of transformation, was Howard University.
Not a literal pilgrimage, but a homecoming of sorts.
It expanded his whole understanding of the black world, saw it as far more than just a photo negative of white America.
He started seeing white America differently, too, as a kind of syndicate organized to protect its power over black bodies.
He mentions having this early, maybe romanticized idea of a single black race with ancient glories.
And Howard shattered that, right, through the sheer diversity of the students, people from everywhere.
Absolutely. And the library there, Moreland Spingarn.
Became his real classroom, immersing himself in black literature, history, thought.
But it wasn't like everyone agreed. He found intellectual debates, different perspectives.
Moved him beyond any single, simple narrative of blackness.
That pursuit of knowing became freedom for him, more than the formal classes.
He met really sharp people there, wise and well-read, who challenged his earlier ideas about the loss of the black body being just this collective thing.
Helping him see how the dream relies on generalizations, on limiting the questions you even ask.
Exactly. And he's also learning the craft of writing there, influenced by poets like Robert Hayden.
Poetry became this intense way of thinking for him, confronting his own biases, his innocence.
Striving for those cold steel truths of life, as he puts it.
He even started seeing discomfort, chaos, as a form of power.
A catalyst. The whole point of his education became about getting uncomfortable, breaking down myths.
Leaving him with this complex, sometimes terrible, view of humanity.
He then uses Prince George's County as an example, this wealthy majority black county near D.C.
But with this notoriously vicious police force, often targeting black residents, what's the point he's making there?
It's a crucial, complicating point. It showed him that black leadership didn't automatically fix the underlying logic of the dream or stop the oppression of black bodies.
So the desire for order, control, the allure of the dream's respectability.
Could still lead to brutality, even within a black power structure. It complicated his understanding of race and power immensely.
His history professors were also key, challenging his weaponized history,
Forcing him to confront things like slavery within Africa. Uncomfortable truths.
leading him to see blackness not as some inherent nobility, but as a product of history, heritage, complex.
He contrasts that complexity with the sheer beauty and energy he saw in the Howard Yard.
Yeah, the diaspora made visible, all the different threads of black life together.
He also talks about early relationships at Howard acting as space bridges.
Connecting him to women from different backgrounds, showing him other ways of seeing the world.
And revealing that love could be different, maybe softer, than the mix of love and fear he grew up with.
All this questioning, this exploration, eventually leads him towards journalism.
As a tool, right?
Yeah.
A way to directly ask the questions he had about the world, about the disparities he saw.
He briefly mentions Prince's death, the musician.
Yeah, that feeling of losing someone you didn't know but who felt like part of you, a loss of possibility.
Then falling in love with his wife, their shared understanding, their commitment to protecting their future child the son he's writing to.
That partnership becomes foundational.
And he starts developing this concept of the plunder of dark energy.
Yeah, this idea of the constant systemic exploitation and devaluation of black life, like draining a resource.
He sees it visually in Chicago, right?
Mm-hmm.
The State Street corridor.
That stretch of rundown public housing becomes a physical symbol of that plunder.
He reflects on the wisdom gained from living among black people, referencing Derek Bell's faces at the bottom of the well.
Recognizing the insights that come from experiencing marginalization firsthand.
And he makes such a powerful plea to remember the enslaved as individuals.
Not a faceless mass, but a particular, specific enslaved woman whose mind is active as your own.
Resisting any narrative that diminishes their full humanity.
And emphasizing how long slavery lasted, urging us not to accept comforting stories that minimize its horror and ongoing impact.
It wasn't just some brief blip.
No, centuries. And its legacy is still with us.
Which leads him to this really stark belief. The God of history is an atheist.
Meaning no divine plan, no guaranteed justice.
So struggle is all we have.
That's the conclusion he reaches. And he passes that on to his son. This message about the unique responsibility for your body in this world.
Having to be responsible, even for things attributed to other black bodies.
It's an immense weight. That constant awareness of perception and threat.
And then he shares his own direct encounter with that threat, the PG County Police.
Knowing their reputation for violence, impunity.
That personal experience just made the danger incredibly real. Feeling utterly powerless.
Which leads, tragically, to the story of Prince Jones.
A young man from a similar background went to Howard, seemed to have made it.
Yet he's killed by that same PG County police force.
Prince Jones becomes the embodiment of Coates' worst fears. Proof that conventional success offers no immunity.
The senselessness, the lack of accountability, it's enraging.
Coates digs into the shaky official story, the inconsistencies.
And concludes Prince wasn't just killed by one officer, but murdered by his country and all the fears that have marked it from birth.
Shifting the focus from individual bad apples to a systemic disease.
Which is why he's so skeptical about surface-level police reform.
Right. If the underlying beliefs don't change.
It won't fix the root problem. And the fact the officer who killed Prince was a known liar with a history of misconduct just highlights that systemic failure.
Prince Jones becomes the superlative of all my fears, representing not just his own vulnerability, but
the shattering of all the love, hope, resources his family poured into him, all destroyed.
the ripple effect.
Immense. He connects this back to his father's generation's mindset. Either I can beat him or the police.
That impossible choice. trying to shield kids from state violence by sometimes using violence themselves.
And he loops back to the dream, how it allows people to avoid responsibility for this violence by blaming it on race, this abstract thing.
Instead of confronting the real actors, the real history.
The rage from Prince Jones' death pushes him to write, to investigate the PG County police history.
Writing as resistance, as a way to process.
But he also observes something unsettling in PG County itself.
Even among the black elites.
Yeah. A seeming comfort with the status quo, and impatience with complaints about brutality. The dream's pull is strong.
Showing how that desire for acceptance, for the dream's rewards, can sometimes compromise the fight for justice.
He reflects on how the lack of safety growing up limited his own imagination.
Couldn't even imagine living outside Baltimore initially.
That fear just narrows your horizons. He contrasts it with people who had different experiences, who traveled.
Like his Uncle Ben, or later his wife.
Oh.
Exposure broadens perspective.
But even moving to New York, that fear didn't just vanish.
Still felt it in his own neighborhood. The old codes lingered.
Which leads to that intense incident on the escalator.
Yeah, the white woman pushing his young son. His immediate rage. What was the conflict there?
It was that primal urge to protect his child, clashing with the harsh reality of being a black man in America.
Okay.
He knew instinctively that reacting physically, even justifiably, could escalate things disastrously. The police could get involved, and the situation could turn deadly for him or even his son, simply because of how black men are often perceived. It was the fear of the system's reaction constraining his own response.
He critiques that American tendency to focus on individual success stories.
Yeah, framing progress as just individual breakthroughs, which obscures the underlying systemic problems that haven't gone away.
And he stresses the need to constantly wake up from the dream, especially for his son, to protect his mind.
Facing the truth, however ugly, is essential to resist the dream's distortions.
That trip south to Petersburg, Shirley Plantation, Gettysburg.
Becomes a lesson in historical erasure, right? Seeing how the black experience is minimized, how the Confederacy is romanticized.
He quotes Mississippi's secession document directly.
Saying slavery was the greatest material interest of the world. Can't be much clearer than that.
And telling the story of Abraham Bryan, the free black man whose farm became part of the Gettysburg Battlefield.
Underscoring that the Confederacy fought to expand slavery, not just preserve it.
And how the common narrative of national reunion often just papers over that brutality.
Comes at the cost of truth, of acknowledging the horror.
He brings in James Baldwin here, that quote, "They think they are white."
Connecting whiteness to power, specifically the power to dominate and exploit black bodies.
Coates interprets it as meaning whiteness needs a below.
Exactly. There is no them without you, he tells his son. And without the right to break you, they must necessarily fall from the mountain, lose their divinity, and tumble out of the dream.
It's a devastating idea that upholding the myth of whiteness is preferred over acknowledging black humanity.
Seems that way. He talks about the extra burden of living among people who insist the dream is real and just, when your own life shows its corruption.
Leads to internalizing blame, anger.
Which brings him back to struggle. The struggle is really all I have for you because it is the only portion of this world under your control.
It's the only agency you truly have against these massive forces.
And he even suggests that vulnerability, because it forces you to confront reality, might bring you closer to life's meaning than the willful ignorance of the dreamers.
But he doesn't soften the reality of the danger. You're cast into a race in which the wind is always at your face and the hounds are always at your heels.
You don't have the luxury of ignoring that.
His wish for his son isn't safety, which he can't promise, but consciousness.
To grow into awareness without shrinking yourself for others' comfort. To struggle consciously, using your own mind as the measure.
He recalls seeing that eviction in Chicago again.
Another instance of that ongoing economic plunder made visible.
He met older black residents there too, survivors who built lives despite the barriers.
Admiring their resilience, but also remembering the millions lost to those same systemic forces.
And he dismantles black-on-black crime. Why does he see that term as so problematic?
Because it completely ignores the context. It erases the history of discriminatory policies, redlining, segregation, lack of opportunity that create the conditions where violence flourishes in specific communities.
It frames it as an internal community problem.
Exactly. Deflecting from the systemic issues. He says the same premise that allows that violence, the devaluation of black bodies, is the exact same premise that led to Prince Jones's murder. It's all connected.
So reject the lie, Grow into consciousness. That's the core message.
Yeah. Then he meets the mother of another murdered black boy, killed for playing his music too loud.
Her composure, her focus on her son's right just to be.
And her message to Coates' son, you exist, you matter, you have every right to be you, and you can never be afraid to be you.
That message feels like a direct counter to what Coates calls disembodiment. Can you explain that term a bit more in this context?
Sure. Disembodiment is Coates' term for how the constant threat and disregard for black physical safety forces black people to live somewhat detached from their own bodies, adopting behaviors like excessive bravado or extreme passivity just to navigate a hostile world.
So it's kind of psychological armor.
Sort of, but one that distorts authentic selfhood. The young man killed for playing music is the ultimate tragic result of his body being denied its basic right to exist and express itself. The mother's message, you have value, be you, is a powerful affirmation against that dehumanizing force. It insists on the inherent worth of the black body and the right to inhabit it fully and authentically despite the world's dangers. Coates' fear in even relaying it shows how potent and necessary yet fragile that affirmation feels.
He looks at his own life then, measures his progress from West Baltimore.
Finds satisfaction in his family, his work, accepting himself as a writer.
Notes how race has always been used to create hierarchies, even when the categories themselves are flimsy.
It's a tool of power.
But he insists his life has been happy, finding joy in the study and the struggle.
Describes it as a rapture that comes only when you can no longer be lied to, when you have rejected the dream.
There's a liberation in seeing clearly, even if the view is harsh.
And the need to keep questioning everything.
He revisits the idea of limited horizons, contrasting his youth with his wife's experiences, and then his own first trip to Paris. What was so key about Paris?
It was stepping outside the American racial context, that feeling of being an alien, a sailor.
Seeing America and himself from a distance.
It showed him how much the dream and the fear tied to it had limited his own perspective back home. He realized he wanted a life for his son apart from that constant fear.
He noticed different social rules in Paris, realized how much his own perceptions were shaped by fear from Baltimore.
Seeing people live differently challenged his assumptions about what was possible, what was normal.
He felt outside the French identity too, connecting that feeling to being black in America, leading to a broader cosmic consciousness.
Seeing the particularity of the American racial structure, but also connecting to a wider sense of human alienation and struggle.
Traveling with family who got it, like his Uncle Ben and Aunt Janai, provided solidarity.
A shared understanding of those historical forces.
But then seeing a protest in Paris about Trayvon Martin's killer being acquitted
Brought it home that this struggle isn't just American, it's global.
He reflects on feeling like a survivor, finding another path beyond the streets and schools.
And recognizing that his son's generation starts from a different place, with different expectations beyond just survival.
He circles back to how current politics often blames victims. Trayvon, Jordan Davis.
That victim blaming upholds the dream by justifying the violence, deflecting from the system.
And summarizes that long history of plunder, from slavery right up to the prison system today. Black bodies as a natural resource.
An enduring, evolving exploitation.
Finally, he returns to Dr. Mabel Jones, Prince's mother, her incredible composure.
Her strength is palpable. Her life story shows someone striving, achieving, within a system designed against her.
He shares her memories of Prince, making him real, beloved.
Highlighting the depth of the loss.
Her ambitions for him, the best universities, and then that simple, gut-wrenching line, I regret that he is dead.
No euphemisms, just raw grief.
He sees her composure as maybe like the civil rights protesters faces a kind of armor,
A way to endure the unendurable.
reasserting his belief that the dreamers would rather live white than live free.
Clinging to that destructive illusion over actual freedom and justice.
He describes the phone call, her physical reaction to the news of Prince's death,
Grief hitting the body.
and her conflicting emotions believing in American fairness, yet facing the reality of injustice. Her hope the officer would be charged.
That captures a dilemma for so many Black Americans. Wanting to believe in the ideals,
Wrong.
knowing the reality.
Her worry for her daughter, bringing a black son into this same America.
The fear continues.
He reflects that even the Mecca, Howard, couldn't ultimately protect Prince. No community is entirely safe within that larger system.
Which leads him to reconsider the civil rights protesters.
Maybe their willingness to face violence wasn't passive acceptance, but a deep understanding of their body's lack of guaranteed safety.
A profound recognition of their precarious status. So those images weren't shameful, just true. revealing the state of being captured.
But he ends not just with bleakness, but with the love and resilience of the Black community. Homecoming at Howard.
The energy, the culture, the shared bonds music, language forged like diamonds under the weight of the dream.
That airport encounter, the nod, the private rapport,
A connection born of shared experience under oppression, but resulting in something beautiful created by the community itself.
and the importance of knowing those roots, that beauty, before going out into the wider world.
Grounding yourself in that community.
Okay, so wrapping this up for the learner, what are the big takeaways from digging into Between the World and Me?
Well, first, this idea that race, especially whiteness, isn't natural. It's a historical construct built through violence.
Right, and the constant vulnerability of Black bodies in America, historically and now.
Then there's the critique of the American dream, how Coates sees it as an illusion for many, built on exploitation.
And maybe most importantly, the call for conscious engagement, to face these hard truths without flinching.
Yeah, resisting those easy, comforting narratives. Coates' own story becomes this powerful lens for understanding these bigger societal truths.
His experiences, his honesty, they offer really valuable insights. What about an aha moment for people? What might really stick?
Maybe his definition of the dream and its cost, or how he reframes black-on-black crime to expose the systemic roots.
Or even just that core idea, race is the child of racism, not the father. That really flips the script.
Definitely. We hope this encourages listeners to think about how these forces still play out today, in policing, inequality, our national dialogues.
Maybe it sparks some further reading or just deeper reflection on these themes.
And a final thought to leave people with.
Yeah.
If Coates is right, if the dream requires a below, what does it actually mean to build a truly just and equitable society for everyone?
Or maybe just asking yourself, when have the stories of the dream felt true in your life? And when have they clashed with what you see or experience? Those clashes can be where real understanding starts.